Hey everyone, Dennis Chang here. So today we're going to talk about technique. I've talked about this topic quite a lot in previous videos, but here it is again because I think it's sometimes good to repeat the same topic because one, I run out of ideas, but two, sometimes explaining the same thing in different ways, sometimes it will click for certain people. Like I have this little aha moment. And three, I don't know what three would be, but I actually wrote a book on Gypsy jazz picking. It's a bestseller on Amazon. You can find the link in the description box. Check it out if you're into Gypsy jazz. But I want to talk about what I want to talk about today is technique from the perspective of a jazz guitarist, natural guitar technique. Sometimes a lot of people tell me, "Oh, Dennis, you have a great technique. You're like amazing right hand technique and everything." And while it is true that I can play quite fast and with quite clean, more often than not, and also with good tone, I wouldn't say that I have great technique compared to like someone who really trains for it, like shredders or something. And what I'm about to say, I've said in previous videos as well, and I'm not saying this to show off or anything. There's actually a logical reason behind this, but I've said that in the past that I've actually never really practiced technique per se. Very, very little. The technique came to me very, very naturally. And a good analogy that I could give is you have all these kids, you give them a smartphone and they can type so fast, but they didn't train to do it. They just do it naturally. But of course in the beginning, they were very, very slow. They had to get used to it. How did they get fast? Because they just typed every single day. Would it be possible to train to type faster on the smartphone? Yes, there are probably some techniques, some shortcuts, but for the most part, most of these kids are doing, over time, they figure out their own little shortcuts. Whether they're the most effective ones or not, doesn't matter. What matters is they're able to do what they need to do at the speed that they need to get to. Now, like a heavy metal shredder who practices technique, probably is gonna, optimize the efficiency and find better patterns and techniques. So it is with jazz guitar, Gypsy jazz guitar or bebop technique, because I do have two techniques, the Gypsy jazz technique and the so-called George Benson technique. And also I can play like kind of the traditional way, the way most people play nowadays. So I can go pretty fast. But all this actually came fairly naturally. And the reason for that is because I'm playing very, very natural guitaristic patterns. If you were to ask me to play something that is less idiomatic, so to speak, or at least not idiomatic to what I usually do, then I will struggle. And the reason why I kind of want to make this video is because just recently my friend Pat from Kuwait, but she's Armenian, asked me to do this little collaboration, which you saw in the beginning, with Jose from Brazil. And she asked me if we could do some little part where we can do some kind of arrangement. And I suggested that we we do this kind of classical pattern that I came up with. But it's inspired by one of Bach's preludes. I think number 2. I think in the key of C minor. Wait, yeah, I think so. And my part goes like this. I'll play it slowly. Gotta say, even though the action is kind of high on this guitar, it was actually much easier to play than on my electric guitar, which is set up with much higher tension because I had it in storage for a year and I didn't touch it. The neck is a little bit warped. It was brutal. At 135 BM, it was so brutal. Like I had to do, I don't know how many takes I had to do. In fact, in between takes, I had to take long breaks. So this is one such thing that is so unnatural for me. If I wanted to do it like faster or even with ease, I'd have to practice this quite a lot. This despite me being able to play things like this. I have to play quietly because I got neighbors. So we. Right? For me, this is so easy because for years I've been playing similar patterns like this, and it's just so very natural. What is so hard about this Bach-like pattern is the pinky, the use of the alternation between the pinky and the ring finger. In hindsight, I should have done this fingering, but it's a little bit of a stretch. If I did it like this, it would be much easier on the left hand. The right hand is no problem. But here's this next part. Then it goes to the C major chord, and it has these notes: C, G, F sharp, G, E, G, F sharp, G. Now, if I did it with my middle finger, it's so brutal. It's really, really hard. Well, slowly, it's fine. I try to do this at 140 BPM, whatever that might be. Try to keep it up. It's really, really hard. So you have So one thing about this natural guitar technique is I realized that one, the pinky is very weak, and I try to favor these three fingers when possible. And this is what we're going to talk about later on in the video. It's the three finger technique that most guitar players, most famous guitar players with really good technique, and especially in jazz, use. They have a three finger system. Django himself is thinking in terms of three fingers. I've talked about this before. But see, if I did it like this, and then I can go on for almost forever. But if I use the pinky, you guys try it yourselves. Try to do the whole pattern like that using the pinky as much as possible. It's brutal, especially if you have a high action guitar. Maybe on a Stratocaster or something, one of those Ibanez Strat guitars, it'd be easier. But anyway, so yeah, that was really, 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 really hard. So we're going to talk about the left hand now. The left hand is very, very important because it does affect things on the right hand. We're going to talk about one aspect of the three finger technique. I'm not going to talk about everything because it's too much. It's too big of a topic. Maybe another time. And I have talked about a little the other aspects in previous videos. But basically on the guitar, you may notice that there are two ways to position your left hand. There's the classical guitar way, which is kind of like this, kind of like have your fingers stand on the frets like this, one finger assigned to a fret when you're in this position, or if you're like have a stretch like this. Whereas the other technique is coming more from classical violin, I guess, where you anchor this part of your hand here, and you have your fingers slightly slanted. Well, you lose the stretch that you can get from the classical technique, but you get so much more control, and it feels very, very natural. So you can watch videos of Wes Montgomery, George Benson, B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Yngwie Malmsteen, Django Reinhardt, pretty much all the famous gypsy jazz players play like this for a reason. It just feels very natural. And we're going to talk about the advantages in a second. And here comes that second. So when you adopt this position like this, assuming you're not using the pinky, you're mainly using these three fingers, you get more control over the individual notes. So you can have access to bends, micro bends, little things like, you know. Imagine trying to do a bend. Try to do a bend. Well, first of all, the pinky. It's possible, of course, but especially on an acoustic guitar, it's really hard. I feel like I'm struggling a little bit. Of course, I could probably practice to be able to do it, but here, when I do it like this, practically takes no effort because the strength is coming from, it's transferring the strength like this. Give it a try yourself. When you play like this, mainly with three fingers, you do a lot of shifting. It just feels very, very natural. And for the most part, that's how I organize my fingerings when I'm playing jazz lines. Now, I'm actually one of the exceptions. I used to be, because of gypsy jazz, I used to be a little bit dogmatic about only using three fingers. Not two fingers. I didn't want to copy Django, because in the gypsy community, among certain people, it's considered disrespectful. So three fingers. That's how Stokely Rosenberg played. But at one point, I decided I didn't want to be dogmatic anymore, and I felt like I'll just use the pinky as well when it felt convenient to use it. So that phrase I played earlier, instead of doing, which is actually easier, but I got used to using the pinky as well. But while I do use the pinky a lot, I'm not using it in the context of something like this, which is really hard. The idea of alternating between these two fingers is extremely difficult. Here it's just like here once, another time. So it gives me a chance to rest my pinky quite a lot. But often when I'm figuring out a fingering to a phrase, I'm trying to think in terms of, right, what's the easiest way to play it? And if I can then use my pinky to do it, great. If I cannot, then I just do the 3-finger system. So the vast majority of phrases that I play fast on the guitar are natural in that sense. And that's why I never really had to practice technique, because I just all I had to do was practice music, practice the lines that I like, and play them every day. And because I play songs at different tempos, eventually I got good at playing them pretty fast, kind of like the smartphone thing. So when you're checking out phrases from different players, sometimes I transcribe horn players or piano players. I think this is a phrase I got from Charlie Parker. So you see, it's the 3-finger system. And I just shift my hand a little bit if I have to go from one position to the other. The phrase goes like this one more time. If I did the classical way, it might be something like this. But here, it's so awkward. I can feel already a little bit of tension. At this speed, it's okay, but if it's much faster, I don't know if I can do it. Ah. It's already hard, but look, at fast tempo. Man, it's so hard to play quietly. Like, I want to play harder, but I don't want to piss off my neighbors. Watch as many videos as you can of Wes Montgomery, George Benson, a lot of these players, so many really. You'll notice a lot of them are using, jazz players I'm talking about, bebop players, a lot of them are using this 3-finger system. And they're playing mainly lines that are super idiomatic. So as long as they play them every day over, after a few months or a year or two, they start to be able to play it fast naturally. That's where all my technique comes from. As many of you know, that I barely play the guitar nowadays. And in fact, my technique has actually suffered to a certain extent, but I can still play a lot of fast lines because it's so natural. And when I say my technique has gone down, because I think there was a point where I would have been able to do this fairly easily. But man, it was a struggle. And that's the key to being able to play natural, quote-unquote, fast lines on jazz guitar. You have to find the natural phrases that you, over time, you build a technique for, and then you don't actually have to really maintain it. You should be able to access the speed at any given time without warming up too much. So depending on your right hand, then you have to arrange the left hand fingerings in such a way that the balance works out between the two hands. So that's something that I learned how to kind of do fairly naturally. I always adopted a logical approach to technique. That's how I was able to play fast naturally. Because sometimes a lot of jazz guitar players, they ask, "Oh, Dennis, how do you play fast? How can I play fast?" Well, first of all, there were some lines that I wanted to be able to play fast, so I learned those lines. And then I arranged the fingerings in such a way that I could feel, hey, I feel that if I continue, I should be able to play fast at one point. The next thing is efficiency on the right hand. You have to adopt a right hand position where you can kind of feel that if you spend enough time, you might be able to go fast with that. So for some of you might have to experiment a lot, but there are a lot of videos now. You can watch videos of people who have good technique and find the person who closely resembles your own right hand position, or a right hand position that maybe you think you can adopt. And most of the time though, in all cases, I think everyone is more or less picking from the wrist, rarely from the arm. If you guys know jazz guitar players who can play very fast and clean and with high endurance from the arm, please let me know. But if you watch most people like George Benson, Pat Martino, Django Reinhardt, Ray Legrand, Stokolo Rosenberg, all those players, despite their different right hand techniques, movement is coming from the wrist. So definitely you have to be mindful of being efficient with your right hand. Again, it's kind of like those teenagers with the smartphones. You're not gonna, let's say, you're not gonna use your pinky like this on the smartphone. I'm sure you can get fast somehow, but teenagers or young people or anyone eventually figures out what works. They find a combination that's fairly efficient. And actually, I want to talk about jazz violin for a second. Because there are certain analogies that I can make here about this naturalness. Classical violinists often practice a lot of things that are very, very unnatural because they have the time to make the unnatural work. If I'm not mistaken, there's the Brahms Violin Concerto in D major, I think D major, that's considered one of the most challenging violin pieces ever written for the instrument. And the reason for that is not because to the average listener, you probably can't hear it, but when you're a violinist yourself, you realize that a lot of the lines that Brahms wrote are so unidiomatic, so unorthodox, that it's just brutal. You have to train yourself to be able to play it in tune with a good tone and everything. And so the reason I'm talking about classical violinists, because I know some classical violinists who have a very solid background, who graduated from the top schools, solid technique. But then sometimes when they start to play jazz, their tuning is a little bit because they actually never train to practice natural things. And then if you check out someone like Stefan Grappelli, his tuning is so spot on because he, from an early age, was not training himself to play these unnatural patterns well. He was training himself to play things that he could improvise over, patterns that he can use for improvisation, and nail it every single time with relative ease. And the proof of that is Grappelli played until he died in the 90s, late 90s. He was in his 80s and he was still playing with, he didn't have the endurance that when he was young, but he could still play fast because he developed a system, a natural violinistic system. And that's what I want to say. It's the same with the guitar. You have to find the most natural phrases, and a lot of times it's going to be based on that 3-finger technique that I talk about, where you prioritize these 3 fingers. And I myself use this finger, but again, I try to minimize the use of it. I don't use it too much, because then I get tired. Try this. How fast can you go, and how long can you maintain it? After a while, I start to feel a little bit tired with my pinky finger. But if I do this, maybe after a while I'll feel tired, but I can maintain it for a very, very long time because these 3 fingers are naturally very, very strong. I'm not saying to completely ignore training your pinky, but just learn to prioritize the stronger fingers if it's possible. You want to make things as simple as possible. So when you're practicing jazz guitar, try to think that way in terms of efficiency, in terms of orthodox, well, not orthodox, but natural fingerings, whatever they might be. And like I said earlier, one of the contributing factors to this naturalness is to practice lines, develop muscle memory, for things that you think you might want to play that you really, really like. For example, if you're playing country, which I don't, but a lot of them, they do these open string things if they play in certain keys. Like a G major scale, they will do things, maybe let me see if I can do it. A country player probably has practiced this. Maybe some country players have practiced this pattern so much that they can do it so fast. So those are things that apply to that person's style of music. And because you want to play these phrases all the time in your improvisation, if you just play, assuming you've adopted the right philosophies for the left and right hands, you play these phrases naturally. Over time, you'll get fast at them and get more. It feels more and more natural. So that is where my natural technique comes from. It was very interesting. I talked about these shredders. There are actually a lot of heavy metal player shredders who are into gypsy jazz. And what I've noticed, they retrain their right hand to adopt this floating right hand position. But I've noticed that the lines that they play are highly influenced by the shred music that they play. So they're still adopting the naturalness, quote unquote, of the styles they were playing before. So that was very interesting for me to see. The lines that I personally tend to play are more, quote unquote, in the style of bebop, in the style of gypsy jazz, Django, whatnot. Yeah, let me just give you something concrete to work with. If you're gonna adopt the three finger mentality, you have to learn how to shift. So I suggest doing things like this, practicing something like this. With chords. Do these things, you know. It's a B minor 7 flat 5 shape, and add the pinky here, and you just go up chromatically. Try to practice that. Well, here's like a bebop phrase. I did some pull-offs as well, I think, somewhere. Step 1, make sure you're efficient here. Step 2, find phrases that you like, that you think you're gonna use all the time. And then find the most natural fingerings according to the system that I talked about. And that's it. Just use them every day and acquire more lines like that, and eventually you'll be able to improvise using those patterns. You can manipulate the phrases, like instead of doing, maybe do. Or see, I just improvise that based on these little patterns, because as I said in previous videos, I've acquired so much muscle memory, and I've learned how to, I guess, decompose a lot of these long patterns into the smaller chunks so that I can mix and match however I feel. It's still a work in progress, of course, but nonetheless, everything that I do, when I play fast or when I play highly technical things, it's because I've worked on them quite a lot, and I've worked on them in such a way that I've arranged the fingerings so that they feel very natural. There we go. So food for thought for those of you who want to get into like shred bebop or shred gypsy jazz, whatever. It's all about playing fast. I think that's what B.B. King said. Eric Clapton, Santana. If you can't play Cherokee at 300 BPM, eighth notes, you're wasting your time. I read that on the internet.